Neal Battaglia, saxstation.com. I got a question on the question page on Sax Station the other day. It was about going from clarinet to the tenor sax. And actually, that's the transition that I made. I started on the clarinet when I was 11 years old. And a few months later, I also started playing the tenor sax. I kept playing the clarinet for a while, but I kind of transitioned to mostly playing tenor sax. Not too long after that, probably a few years later. So basically, the clarinet is a little bit different than the tenor sax in a few different ways. Maybe one of the main differences is the register key instead of the octave key. So the register key on the clarinet makes you go up by 12 tones, or 19 semitones, 19 half steps. So that's a little bit different than an octave key. An octave key is going to make it so basically two octaves feel about the same. On the clarinet, if you use certain fingerings and you press the register key, they're going to be different notes. So the lowest notes on the clarinet, going down to a low E, are going to feel a little bit different than the lowest notes on the saxophone. And just having a low E is lower than you can go on the saxophone in terms of that note anyway, where you see it on the staff. So you can go down to an E below the staff. You kind of need to know the fingerings for the lower notes, and then once you get up to the B flat, beyond that you get up to a B, you start using the register key. Once you get to that though, the B with the register key starts feeling like the notes feel on the saxophone where you put your fingers. So a B, a C, and then you do use your right pinky a little bit more than you do on the saxophone. On the saxophone, there's two keys down here. On the clarinet, there's 4 different options. With the left pinky, there's 4 different options. It's actually kind of the same situation with the saxophone. There's 4 options with the table keys. So once you get up to using the register keys, the notes start to feel like they feel for the saxophone in a similar part of the staff. And actually, they feel about the same as they would on the lower part of the saxophone. So if you're starting on clarinet and going to saxophone, the fingering system is actually a little bit simpler for the saxophone. Another big difference is that the clarinet is physically smaller than the tenor sax. So it's going to require more air to play the tenor saxophone, so be aware of that. You might just need to put more air into the horn. But you also want to maybe be careful about not honking out the notes. That's actually a bad habit that's pretty easy to get into, especially as a kid. I think when I was 11, when I was starting playing the saxophone, I developed a few bad habits with playing low notes, and it's taken a very long time to kind of correct those. It still can just be hard to play low notes sometimes depending on the situation, but be aware of that and try and kind of not expend a lot of extra air and honk something out and move your jaw a lot when you play low notes, because that can be a bad habit that makes the notes not sound that great, and it's something that's kind of hard to correct if you have this ingrained in how you play. So the clarinet is in B flat, the tenor sax is also in B flat, the soprano sax is also in B flat, the alto sax and the bari sax are in E flat. So if you do have like music written for clarinet, you can probably play it on the saxophone. You just might need to be aware of the range sometimes. You can basically play more notes on the clarinet easier than you can on the tenor saxophone. You can expand the range on the tenor sax too, but it does take some work and time with the altissimo range, and the lower end is pretty much set. So basically some of the notes feel pretty similar. On the clarinet, you do have open holes rather than buttons that press the keys down. So you need to be able to cover those up. It's going to feel a little bit different on the clarinet compared to the saxophone, but not really that different. Your fingers kind of go in about the same places. It's going to feel slightly different on a key versus a hole. Yeah, basically similar fingering systems. Kind of a similar idea with the register key and the octave key, but it works a little bit differently. The octave key kind of simplifies things because you can basically move your fingers in a similar way for about 2 octaves of the notes on the saxophone. You basically use a neck strap or a harness on the saxophone. Most clarinet players hold it up like this with the thumb rest. It's not too heavy. It's a problem for a few people. You can actually get an attachment to kind of get a neck strap also for the clarinet, if that's an issue for you. So the actual question was, what can I do to transition from clarinet to tenor sax? She'd been playing for 2 days. She's using her clarinet books because they're both in B flat. She knew that. She said, getting the sound, the right tone and pitch out of every note I play, trying to get the right embouchure. She said, some notes won't play without the register key, some won't raise their pitch with the register key, and my hands are pretty small, so it's hard to play some notes without pressing other keys back. I would say when you play the clarinet, you're going to kind of develop your range of the notes. You're not going to play every note from day one if you haven't played any similar instrument before. And on the saxophone, it's a similar situation. you're going to have a head start because they are similar, but they're not exactly the same. So with the saxophone, I would say what I say to people who are just starting off with saxophone who haven't played clarinet, start off with like B and A and G. Play the mid-range of the saxophone for the notes. Those are going to be easier to get. Start expanding downwards, start expanding upwards. But basically, she'd been playing for 2 days, and I think she maybe had a little bit unrealistic expectations about the similarity between the two instruments. They are similar in quite a few ways, but they're not exactly the same, and you're going to need to spend time and effort to get the notes. I'm not sure if the saxophone maybe needs some repairs. If you have like leaky pads or something like that, it's going to make the whole experience of learning it a lot more difficult. But even if it is in perfect shape, it's going to take some time and work to get all the notes on the saxophone just to be able to play them. Sometimes what happens is the low notes come out and they sound like high notes, even without the octave key. That's pretty common. Another thing is maybe you press the octave key and it doesn't do what you expect it to do. I think the main thing is just to keep practicing. Like 2 days is a start, but it's not enough time to really actually even get all the notes, I would say, even if you have played the clarinet. So keep practicing, practice it every day, spend more time on the saxophone. Think about what you want to do as your priority, though. Do you want to be a better clarinet player, or do you want to be a better saxophone player? I would think about that and maybe concentrate more of your time on the instrument that you want to spend more time on, that you want to put your focus with. So keep practicing, probably use a little bit more air when you play, possibly go in, see a repair person, see if you need to get anything fixed, if there's a leaky pad or something like that. On the clarinet, because of the open holes, you don't have a pad right here. You put your finger is the pad. And that's something you might not think about if you've been playing clarinet for a little while, is that the pads, there are some pads on the clarinet, but not as many, because like where your fingers go, like these holes are just covered by your fingers. So you do need to replace the felt pads sometimes on the clarinet, but there's just, I think, more pads on the saxophone. They're made out of leather. They're a little bit different situation. They're bigger usually. Even a small leak, it can cause problems. And if you have multiple leaks, the problems can compound and cause a bigger issue. So yeah, it's a little bit different on the clarinet compared to the saxophone. You might need to get the pads checked out. Just keep practicing it. If you like the saxophone, if you like the tenor saxophone, I would say the tenor is probably the saxophone that most saxophonists prefer. Not all of them, but I would say probably the bigger number of saxophonists kind of tend to gravitate towards the tenor saxophone. Yeah, let me know if you have other questions about transitioning from clarinet to saxophone. I play a little bit of flute, but not too much. I did start on the clarinet and went to saxophone. Flute is similar in a lot of ways with the fingerings, but it is pretty different in terms of how you produce the sound. You're kind of blowing across the flute head rather than going into a reed, kind of different situation. If you want to join the beginning saxophone players group, you can go to that link, answer the questions, you can get some feedback on your playing, ask some questions about what you're working on, and connect with some other beginning saxophone players. If you want to take classes and do lessons with me, you can check out what's available on saxstation.com, and let me know what you'd like to see in new videos. If you like what you're seeing, go ahead and subscribe. That helps me do what I'm doing. The support kind of helps me on YouTube and spreading what I'm doing to more people who are learning how to play the saxophone.